It was a regular night at the diner. I was wiping down the counter, getting ready to close up, when I saw them walk in. Two guys, both wearing hoodies, looking kinda shifty. I didn't think much of it at first, just figured they were hungry and wanted some late-night grub. They sat down at a booth in the corner, and I went over to take their order. They were quiet, almost too quiet, and I could tell something was off. I went back to the counter, trying to shake the weird feeling I got from them. As I was cleaning up, I overheard their conversation. They were talking in hushed voices, looking around the place like they were planning something. My heart started pounding, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go down. Then, one of them got up and started walking towards the back where the kitchen is. I panicked and tried to stop him, but he just shoved me aside. I yelled for him to stop, but he kept going. I was shaking as I followed him, and that's when I saw the other guy pulling something out of his jacket. It was a knife. I froze. My mind was racing, and I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare. The guy in the kitchen was rummaging through the shelves, and I could hear him muttering to himself. I knew I had to do something, so I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy skillet. I crept up behind the guy with the knife, and before he could react, I swung the skillet as hard as I could. It connected with a loud thud, and he crumpled to the floor. The other guy came running, but I swung the skillet at him too, and he went down. I called the cops, and they arrived pretty quick. Turns out, those guys were wanted for some serious stuff. I was shaking like a leaf, but I was so relieved it was over. That night was the scariest thing I've ever been through. I'm just glad I made it out okay. I was the lighthouse keeper, and that night, the sea was rough, the wind howling like a pack of wolves. I was doing my usual rounds, making sure everything was shipshape, when I saw them. 3 men, standing at the base of the lighthouse, just staring up at me. I called out to them, but they didn't respond. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine as I watched them. They looked odd, wearing tattered clothes, and their eyes were hollow, like they'd seen too much. I knew I had to keep an eye on them, so I stayed up in the lighthouse, watching as they paced around the base, never taking their eyes off me. It felt like they were waiting for something, and I didn't like the feeling one bit. As the night dragged on, the storm got worse, and the lighthouse began to creak and groan. I was on edge, and those 3 men weren't helping. Then, suddenly, the light went out. I panicked, rushing to get it back on, but as I fumbled with the controls, I heard the door downstairs slam open. I crept down, heart pounding, and saw the 3 men standing in the entryway, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew I had to protect myself. I grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy wrench, and stood my ground. They started to advance, and I swung the wrench, catching one of them on the shoulder. He stumbled back, but the other 2 kept coming. I backed up, trying to keep them at bay, but they were relentless. It was like they were possessed. I managed to land a few more hits, but they just kept coming. I was running out of options, and the storm outside was raging. Then, just as I thought I was done for, I heard the sound of a ship's horn in the distance. The men froze, their eyes darting towards the sea. In that split second, I made a break for it, racing past them and up the stairs. I locked myself in the control room, watching as the ship emerged from the storm, its lights cutting through the darkness. The men didn't waste a second. They sprinted out of the lighthouse and towards the shore, disappearing into the night. I stayed put until the ship's crew found me, and when they did, I told them everything. To this day, I don't know who those men were or what they wanted, but I'm just glad that ship showed up when it did. It was the closest call I've ever had, and I'll never forget those haunting eyes staring up at me from the base of the lighthouse. I remember that night like it was yesterday. I was at the office, finishing up some work because I had a deadline the next day. It was already late, and I was the only one left in the building. The new security guard, Mike, was supposed to be making his rounds, but I hadn't seen him all night. I was sitting at my desk, typing away, when I heard a sound coming from the hallway. It was like footsteps, but they were slow and deliberate, almost like someone was trying not to make too much noise. I thought maybe it was just Mike doing his rounds, so I didn't pay much attention to it at first. But then the footsteps stopped right outside my office. I felt this chill run down my spine, and I swear the air in the room got colder. I called out, "Mike, is that you?" But there was no answer. I got up and went to the door, but when I looked out into the hallway, there was no one there. I started to feel really uneasy, like something wasn't right. I went back to my desk and tried to focus on my work, but then I heard it again, footsteps, coming from the other end of the hallway this time. I felt this sense of dread creeping over me, and I didn't know what to do. I decided to go check it out, so I grabbed a flashlight from my desk drawer and headed out into the hallway. The building was dark, with only the emergency lights on, casting long shadows that made everything look eerie. I called out for Mike again, but there was nothing but silence in response. As I made my way down the hallway, I heard a faint whispering sound. It was like someone was muttering under their breath, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I turned the corner and shone my flashlight down the hallway, and that's when I saw him, Mike, the new security guard. But he wasn't walking or doing his rounds. He was standing there, completely still, facing the wall. It was like he was frozen in place. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. I started to walk towards him, and that's when I noticed something strange. It looked like he was talking to the wall, having a conversation with it. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but the way he was gesturing and nodding his head was like he was having a real conversation with someone. I didn't know what to do. I was freaked out, and I didn't want to get any closer to him. I turned around to go back to my office and call the police, but then I heard his voice behind me. "Don't leave," he said, and his voice sent shivers down my spine. I turned back around, and that's when I saw his face. It was like his eyes were glowing in the dark, and his expression was twisted into this sinister grin. I felt this overwhelming fear wash over me, and I ran as fast as I could back to my office, slamming the door shut behind me. I could hear him outside, banging on the door and laughing. It was this chilling, bone-chilling laughter that made my blood run cold. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped in my office, and I didn't have a way to call for help. I just sat there, listening to him laughing and banging on the door, feeling this deep sense of dread and fear. The next thing I knew, everything went quiet. I waited for what felt like hours, too scared to move or make a sound. When I finally mustered the courage to peek out into the hallway, there was no sign of Mike. It was like he had disappeared into thin air. I grabbed my things and got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't stop running until I was outside, and even then, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him following me. To this day, I still can't explain what happened that night. I don't know if Mike was playing some sick prank on me, or if there was something seriously wrong with him. All I know is that I'll never forget the terror I felt when I came face to face with him in that dark, empty hallway. It was a quiet night at the packing warehouse. My job as a security guard was pretty straightforward. Keep an eye on the place, made sure everything was secure, and be prepared for anything that might come my way. I liked the solitude of the job, but that night, things took a turn that I'll never forget. I was doing my rounds, checking all the locks and making sure everything was in order when I saw him. There was a man standing at the far end of the warehouse, just staring at me. It was unsettling because no one was supposed to be there at that time of night, especially not in the restricted areas. I called out to him, asking what he was doing there, but he didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching me with this intense look in his eyes. I could feel this chill creeping up my spine, and I didn't know what to make of it. I walked closer to him, trying to get a better look and maybe figure out what he was up to. But as I got closer, I realized something was off about him. His clothes were tattered, and he had this wild, unkempt look about him. It was like he hadn't slept in days, and his eyes were darting around like he was on edge. I asked him again what he was doing there, but he just mumbled something incoherent. It was like he was talking to himself, and I couldn't make out what he was saying. I started to feel this sense of unease, like something wasn't right about the whole situation. I reached for my radio to call for backup, but as soon as I did, he lunged at me. I stumbled back, trying to keep him at bay, but he was relentless. It was like he was in some kind of frenzy, and I didn't know what to do. We struggled, and I could feel this surge of panic rising in me. I managed to push him away and make a run for it, but he was right on my heels. I could hear him shouting something, but I couldn't make out the words. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there. I made it to the main entrance, but when I looked back, he was gone. It was like he had disappeared into thin air. I was shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know who he was or what he wanted, but I knew I had to get help. I called the police and explained what had happened. They arrived quickly and searched the entire warehouse, but there was no sign of the man. It was like he had vanished without a trace. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered after that night. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, trying to make sense of it all, but it just didn't add up. Who was that man, and what was he doing in the warehouse? To this day, I still can't explain it. I don't know if he was just a troubled soul looking for shelter or if there was something more sinister going on. All I know is that the memory of that chilling encounter will stay with me for a long time. I was getting ready for another long night at the 24-hour convenience store. The graveyard shift was always quiet, and I liked the peace and quiet. But that night, things took a turn that I never saw coming. It was around 2 a.m. when two girls walked into the store. They looked young, maybe in their late teens, and they had this eerie vibe about them. I greeted them with a smile, trying to be friendly, but they just looked at me with these blank stares. I could tell something was off about them, but I tried not to let it get to me. They started wandering around the store, picking up random items and putting them back down. It was like they were just killing time, but there was something unsettling about the way they moved. It was like they were in a trance or something. I kept an eye on them, trying to be discreet, but the longer they stayed, the more uneasy I felt. They weren't saying anything to each other, just silently browsing the aisles like they were lost. It was giving me the creeps, and I couldn't shake this feeling in the pit of my stomach. I decided to go to the back room to grab some stock, hoping that when I came back, they would be gone. But when I returned, they were standing at the counter, staring at me with these cold, unblinking eyes. It was like they were looking right through me, and I felt this chill run down my spine. I asked them if they needed any help, but they just kept staring. It was like they were in some kind of trance, and I didn't know what to do. I tried to keep my cool, but I could feel this sense of dread creeping over me. One of the girls finally spoke, but her voice was so hollow and distant. She asked for a pack of cigarettes, and I fumbled as I handed them over. I just wanted them to leave, but they lingered at the counter, not saying anything, just staring at me with those vacant eyes. I could feel my heart racing, and I knew I had to get them out of the store. I tried to make small talk, asking if they needed anything else, but they just kept staring at me. It was like they were waiting for something, and I didn't want to stick around to find out what. As they finally turned to leave, I let out a sigh of relief. But as they walked out the door, one of them turned back to me and whispered something under her breath. I couldn't make out the words, but it sent shivers down my spine. I locked the door behind them and just stood there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I couldn't shake this feeling of unease, like something wasn't right about those girls. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but I knew I didn't want to see them again. I called the police and explained what had happened, but there wasn't much they could do. They took my statement and said they would keep an eye out, but I knew the chances of finding those girls were slim. I spent the rest of the night on edge, jumping at every little sound. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, trying to figure out what it all meant. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that some things just don't have an explanation. To this day, I still can't shake the memory of those girls and the chilling encounter we had that night. I don't know what they were up to or what they wanted, but I know one thing for sure. I hope I never see them again. It was one of those nights when I had to catch up on work. I work from home, and sometimes the late hours just seem to stretch on forever. I was sitting in my home office, the only light coming from my computer screen. The house was quiet, and the only sound was the occasional click of my keyboard. I was in the zone, trying to finish up an important project before the deadline. Then, out of nowhere, there was a knock on the door. It jolted me out of my focus, and I hesitated. Who could be knocking at this time of night? I glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. I slowly got up from my desk and made my way to the front door. My heart was pounding in my chest as I peered through the peephole, but there was no one there. I figured it was probably just some kids messing around. I went back to my desk, trying to regain my concentration. But then, there it was again, another knock. This time, it was more urgent, almost insistent. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, then I cautiously approached the door. I asked, "Who's there?" No response. I asked again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling slightly. As I turned the knob and opened the door, I was met with an eerie silence. There was no one there. I stepped out onto the porch, looking around, but the street was empty and quiet. Just as I was about to close the door, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look, and that's when I saw a figure standing at the edge of the yard. It was too dark to make out any details, but I could feel my heart racing. I called out, "Hey, who's there?" The figure didn't move or respond. I felt a surge of unease creeping up my spine. I took a step forward, squinting to try and see more clearly. That's when the figure started to move, slowly stepping into the dim light cast by the street lamp. As the figure came into view, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was a man, but there was something off about him. His clothes were tattered and dirty, and his face was obscured by the shadow of a hood. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I called out, "Can I help you?" But the man didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring at me with an intense, unblinking gaze. I could feel the fear welling up inside me. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to slam the door shut and lock it, but I was frozen in place. The man took a step closer, and that's when I noticed something glinting in his hand. It was a knife, the blade catching the faint light. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled back, my mind racing with fear and panic. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I knew I had to get away. I turned and ran back into the house, my heart racing. I could hear the sound of footsteps behind me, and I knew the man was following. I ran through the darkened hallway, my pulse pounding in my ears. I fumbled for the phone, my hand shaking as I dialed 911. I could hear the man's footsteps getting closer, and I knew I didn't have much time. As I waited for the dispatcher to pick up, I heard the sound of the front door creaking open. I knew I had to hide. I dashed into the nearest room and locked the door behind me. I could hear the man moving through the house, his footsteps heavy and purposeful. I held my breath, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I could hear him getting closer, his footsteps echoing through the hallway. Suddenly, the door handle rattled, and I knew he was right outside. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. I could hear the man breathing on the other side of the door. I closed my eyes, praying that help would arrive soon. Just then, I heard the distant sound of sirens approaching, and the man's footsteps quickly receded. It felt like an eternity before the police arrived, but when they did, they found the man had fled. They searched the area, but he was nowhere to be found. I was shaken, but unarmed. As the officers took my statement, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered in the air. I knew that chilling encounter would stay with me for a long time. It was one of those nights, you know, when you feel like nothing's going to happen, but then everything changes. I'm an emergency plumber, so getting called out at 1 a.m. is not unusual. I got this call about a leak in an old house on the outskirts of town. The address was in a neighborhood I didn't know, and the GPS took me down this dark, winding road that seemed to go on forever. When I finally found the house, it looked like something out of a horror movie. The paint was peeling, the windows were dark, and the whole place had this eerie vibe. I grabbed my tools, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. It creaked open slowly, and I was hit with a musty smell that made my skin crawl. "Hello?" I called out, but there was no answer. I stepped inside, and the floorboards groaned under my weight. The only light came from a flickering bulb in the hallway. I followed the sound of dripping water to the basement, and that's when I saw her. A woman was standing down there, her back to me, muttering something I couldn't quite make out. "Ma'am, I'm here to fix the leak," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned around, and her eyes were wild, like she hadn't slept in days. She had this haunted look, like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She led me to the source of the leak, and as I worked, she just stood there, watching me with those intense eyes. It was unnerving, to say the least. I finished up, and when I turned to tell her it was all fixed, she was gone. I called out for her, but there was no response. I packed up my tools and headed back upstairs, but the front door was locked. I tried to stay calm, but the situation was getting to me. I called out again, but there was only silence. Then, I heard a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "You shouldn't have come here." I spun around, but there was no one there. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on my chest. I fumbled with the lock, my heart pounding in my ears. Finally, the door gave way, and I stumbled out into the night. I didn't look back, just got in my van and drove as fast as I could. The whole way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something terrible. To this day, I don't know what really happened in that house. Was it just my imagination, or was there something more sinister at play? All I know is that I'll never forget the chilling encounter with that homeowner, and I'll think twice before taking another late-night call in an unfamiliar place. I was pet sitting for a couple of dogs in a quiet neighborhood. The owners had warned me about the reclusive neighbor, Mr. Smith, who lived next door. They said he was harmless but a bit odd. One night, as I was settling in, I heard a faint knock on the door. It was well past midnight, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole. I saw a tall, gaunt man standing on the porch. It was Mr. Smith. I hesitantly opened the door, and Mr. Smith began rambling incoherently about strange happenings in the neighborhood. He seemed agitated and kept glancing over his shoulder as if he were being followed. I tried to calm him down, but his wild eyes and erratic behavior sent shivers down my spine. As I was about to offer him a glass of water, I noticed something unsettling. There was a smear of blood on his sleeve, and his hands were trembling. I realized that something was seriously wrong, and my heart began to race. I managed to convince Mr. Smith to let me call the police, and as soon as I mentioned it, he bolted into the night. The police later informed me that there had been a break-in at Mr. Smith's house, and he had narrowly escaped the intruders. I was driving to make a late-night fast food delivery to the outskirts of town when I noticed a car tailing me. At first, I thought nothing of it, but as I made turn after turn, the car stayed right behind me. My heart began to race, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tried to focus on the road, but the car's headlights in my rearview mirror felt like accusing eyes. I made it to the delivery address, a remote house with only a dim porch light to greet me. As I handed over the food, I couldn't help but glance back at the road, half expecting to see the car that had been following me. The customer must have noticed my unease and asked if everything was okay. I brushed it off, but as I got back into my car, I saw the same vehicle parked a few houses down, its engine still running. I decided to take a different route back, hoping to lose the car, but it stayed behind me, never getting too close but never falling too far behind. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a prank? A coincidence? Or something more sinister? I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of my stomach. As I approached a more populated area, I thought about pulling over and confronting the driver behind me, but the thought of what might happen if I did kept me driving. I called a friend and asked them to stay on the line with me until I made it back to the restaurant. The familiar voice on the other end was a lifeline in the growing darkness. When I finally reached the restaurant, the car that had been following me kept going, disappearing into the night. I sat in my car for a long time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The whole experience had shaken me to my core, and I couldn't bring myself to go back out on another delivery that night. The encounter left me with a lingering sense of unease, and I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if I hadn't made it back to the safety of the restaurant. The memory of those headlights in my rearview mirror haunted me for weeks, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something truly terrifying. I was working the night shift at the auto shop when I got a call about a car broken down a few miles away. It was a quiet night, and I didn't mind the drive. As I made my way to the location, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The road was deserted, and the only sound was the hum of my engine. When I finally reached the spot, I saw the car, its hazard lights blinking in the darkness. I pulled up behind it and got out to take a look. As I approached, I noticed a figure sitting in the driver's seat. I called out to ask if they needed help, but they didn't respond. I felt a chill run down my spine. I hesitantly made my way to the driver's side and knocked on the window. the figure inside didn't move. I tried the door, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. As I opened it, a cold gust of wind hit me, and I realized the person inside wasn't moving at all. I reached out to shake their shoulder, and that's when I saw their face. It was pale, almost translucent, and their eyes were wide open, staring into nothingness. A shiver ran through me, and I stumbled back, my heart racing. I fumbled for my phone to call for help, but as I looked up, I saw the figure in the car was gone. The door was still open, but there was no one inside. I felt a wave of panic wash over me as I scanned the area, but there was no sign of anyone. I quickly got back into my car and started the engine. As I pulled away, I saw a shadowy figure in the rearview mirror, standing by the broken-down car. My blood ran cold, and I stepped on the gas, not daring to look back again. The rest of the drive back to the shop was a blur. I couldn't shake the image of the empty car and the figure that had vanished into thin air. When I finally made it back, I told my colleagues what had happened, but they just laughed it off, saying it was probably just my imagination playing tricks on me. But I knew what I had seen. The memory of that chilling encounter would stay with me for a long time, a reminder that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are all too real. I was working a late-night surveillance job, tailing a man suspected of cheating on his wife. The city was quiet, and the only sound was the hum of my car's engine. I kept my distance, making sure not to lose sight of the man I was following. As we wound through the empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was as if the darkness itself was closing in around me. After a while, the man I was following turned down a desolate road on the outskirts of town. I followed suit, keeping my headlights trained on his car. But as I rounded a bend, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was another car behind me, its headlights off, but I could make out its silhouette in the dim moonlight. I felt a surge of panic as I realized I was the one being followed. I stepped on the gas, trying to put some distance between us, but the other car stayed right on my tail. My mind raced with possibilities. Who were they, and what did they want with me? As I navigated the dark, winding road, I saw the other car pull alongside me. I stole a glance and saw a figure behind the wheel, their face obscured by the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest as I focused on the road ahead, trying to come up with a plan. Suddenly, the other car swerved and rammed into the side of my car. The impact sent me careening off the road, and I struggled to regain control. When I finally came to a stop, my heart was racing, and my hands were shaking. I reached for my phone to call for help, but to my horror, I realized it was missing. I knew I had to get out of there. I stumbled out of the car and into the darkness, trying to put as much distance between me and the other vehicle as possible. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs made me jump, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the distant glow of a gas station up ahead. I pushed myself to keep moving, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I finally reached the safety of the station, I called the police and told them what had happened. As I sat there, waiting for help to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something truly terrifying. The memory of those headlights in my rearview mirror and the chilling pursuit through the night would stay with me for a long time. I was working the night shift as a cleaner at a local store, just like any other night. The store was quiet, and the only sound was the soft hum of the cleaning machines. I liked the solitude of the night shift. It gave me a chance to work in peace and quiet. As I was going about my usual routine, I heard a faint noise coming from the back of the store. I thought it might be a stray animal or something, so I went to check it out. But as I made my way through the aisles, the noise stopped, and I couldn't see anything out of place. I shrugged it off and went back to my cleaning. But as I was finishing up, I heard the noise again, this time closer. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. I started to feel uneasy, like I was being watched. Just then, two men stepped out from the shadows. They were wearing dark clothes and had hoods pulled low over their faces. My heart started racing, and I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. I asked them what they were doing there, but they didn't answer. Instead, they started to move closer, their footsteps echoing in the empty store. I knew I had to get out of there. I turned and ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps getting closer and closer. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew I had to find a way to escape. I made it to the front of the store and out into the parking lot. I could see my car in the distance, and I ran towards it as fast as my legs would carry me. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking with fear. As I finally got the door open and jumped inside, I saw the two men emerge from the store. I started the car and peeled out of the parking lot, not daring to look back. I could feel their eyes on me, and I knew I had narrowly escaped something truly chilling. Been a cop for the past 8 years now. One night I was patrolling the quiet streets on a late night shift, just like any other night. The city was peaceful, and the only sound was the gentle hum of the car's engine. I liked the solitude of the night shift. It gave me a chance to keep an eye on things without all the hustle and bustle of the day. As I was making my rounds, I saw a disturbance near the old warehouse on the edge of town. I decided to check it out, thinking it might be some kids causing trouble. But as I got closer, I saw two men engaged in a heated argument. I stepped in to try and calm the situation, but they both turned on me with wild, angry eyes. I could feel the tension in the air, and my instincts told me that something wasn't right. The men's voices grew louder, and I could see the glint of something metallic in one of their hands. I knew I had to act fast. I called for backup on the radio, but before I could do anything else, one of the men lunged at me. I stumbled backward, trying to keep my balance, but I could feel the cold, hard metal of a knife against my skin. My heart was racing, and I knew I was in serious trouble. I managed to push the man away and draw my weapon, hoping to scare them off. But they kept coming, their eyes filled with a wild, desperate look. I could hear the distant wail of sirens as backup raced to the scene, but I knew they wouldn't make it in time. I tried to reason with the men, to get them to see sense, but they were beyond reason. They were like animals, driven by some kind of primal rage. I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me, and I knew that I was in the fight of my life. As the standoff continued, I could see the glint of moonlight off the blade of the knife. I knew that if I didn't act fast, I might not make it out of there alive. The men kept advancing, and I knew I had no choice but to defend myself. In the chaos of the moment, I heard the sharp crack of gunfire. The world seemed to slow down as everything played out in front of me. When the dust settled, I was still standing, but the two men lay motionless on the ground. The sirens grew louder as backup arrived, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But as I looked down at the two men, their eyes empty and lifeless. I was working the night shift at the hotel, just like any other night. The lobby was quiet. I liked the peace and quiet of the night shift. It gave me a chance to catch up on some reading between check-ins. As I was going about my usual routine, I saw a man and a woman enter the lobby. They were an odd pair, dressed in dark clothes and wearing sunglasses, even though it was the middle of the night. I greeted them with a smile and asked how I could help. The man spoke in a low, gravelly voice, and I could feel a shiver run down my spine. They said they needed a room for the night, and I started to go through the check-in process. But as I was getting their information, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The man and woman kept exchanging furtive glances, and I could feel their eyes on me. As I handed them their key, the man's hand brushed against mine, and I felt a chill run through me. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As they made their way to the elevator, I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I tried to put it out of my mind and focus on my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I kept glancing at the security monitors, half expecting to see the odd pair doing something they shouldn't be. A few hours passed, and I was starting to relax, thinking maybe I had just been imagining things. But then I heard a noise coming from the hallway. It was a soft, scraping sound, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. I went to investigate, and that's when I saw them. The man and woman were standing at the end of the hallway, their eyes locked on mine. I felt a surge of panic as I realized they were watching me, waiting for me. I turned and ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear their footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew I had to find a way to escape. I made it to the stairwell and started to descend as fast as my legs would carry me. But as I reached the ground floor, I saw them waiting for me at the bottom. There was nowhere left to run. I could feel the man's cold, unblinking gaze on me as they closed in. I knew that I was in serious trouble. Just then, I heard the distant sound of police sirens. The odd pair turned and vanished into the night, leaving me shaken and terrified. I was out on my early morning milk delivery route, just like any other day. The roads were quiet. I liked the peacefulness of the early hours. It gave me a chance to gather my thoughts before the day began. As I was driving down a deserted stretch of road, I saw another car up ahead. It was an odd place to see another vehicle at that time of day, but I didn't think much of it at first. As I got closer, I saw that the car was pulled over to the side, and a man and a woman were standing next to it. I slowed down to see if they needed help, but as I got closer, I felt a shiver run down my spine. There was something about the way they were standing that didn't sit right with me. They were both wearing dark clothes, and their expressions were cold and unreadable. I rolled down my window and asked if everything was okay. The man spoke in a low, gravelly voice, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. He said they were fine and didn't need any help, but his eyes never left mine. I tried to brush it off and went to continue on my way, but as I pulled ahead, I saw them get back into their car and start to follow me. I could feel a surge of panic rising in my chest. I tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I made a few turns to see if they would keep following me, and sure enough, they did. My heart was racing, and I knew I had to find a way to lose them. I took a few more turns, hoping to shake them off, but no matter what I did, they stayed right behind me. I could feel the weight of their gaze on me, and I knew that I was in serious trouble. I tried to keep calm and focused on finding a way out of the situation, but the feeling of unease in the pit of my stomach only grew stronger. As I made a sharp turn onto a side street, I saw a police car up ahead. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I pulled up next to the officer and told him what had been happening. The odd pair's car slowed down as it passed us, and I could feel their eyes on me one last time before they disappeared into the early morning light. All right, Listen up, this ain't your ordinary security guard yarn. No shadow figures or bumps in the night. This is raw fear, bottled and aged in a basement full of bad vibes. See, I used to do nights at this old textile factory out in the boonies. Brick behemoth, built like it could survive a nuke, stood empty after they moved production overseas. My job? Keep trespassers out, the machines quiet, and my sanity intact. First few weeks were a drag. Crickets chirping, wind howling through broken windows, shadows stretching longer than my bank account. Then, one night, something changed. I was making my rounds, flashlight beam cutting through the dust motes dancing in the air, when I heard it. Faint at first, like a kid whispering secrets, then louder, a rhythmic creak. Like footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming from the north wing. Now, I ain't no scaredy cat, but that factory had a way of slipping under your skin. Every groan of the rusty pipes, every flicker of the dying bulb, felt like a taunt. Still, duty calls, right? I grabbed my radio, crackling static the only answer, and headed towards the sound. Each step echoed in the cavernous halls, my heart thumping a tribal beat against my ribs. The air thickened, smell of mold and decay stinging my nostrils. The creak grew louder, each thud closer than the last, like something was stalking me. I rounded a corner, flashlight sweeping ahead, and froze. There, at the end of the corridor, a figure in the darkness. Tall, shrouded in shadows, it stood impossibly still. My breath hitched, every instinct screaming to run. But something held me rooted, like a rabbit caught in headlights. I stammered into the radio, my voice thin and shaky. Dispatch? I got something here. North wing, 3rd floor. Silence. Dead air, thicker than the shadows themselves. The figure shifted, a glint of metal catching my eye. Not a weapon, I realized, but a toolbox, dented and rusted. Relief washed over me, so fast it almost made me dizzy. Just some lost maintenance worker, spooking himself silly. Hey! I called out, voice still wobbly. You lost, buddy? Come on out, let's get you sorted. No answer. The figure remained frozen, silent vigil in the gloom. My unease returned, prickling at the back of my neck. Something wasn't right. The way it stood, unnaturally still, no hint of breath, no sway in the darkness. And those eyes, 2 pinpricks of light reflected in my beam, seemed to pierce right through me, cold and empty. Then it moved. Slow, deliberate, like a predator savoring its prey. My finger tightened on the radio, but the words wouldn't come. Panic clawed at my throat, legs rooted to the spot. The figure kept coming, toolbox glinting, eyes like bottomless pits. And that's the last thing I remember. Next thing I knew, I was curled up on the floor, cold sweat and tears stinging my eyes. Radio clutched in my hand, dead as a doornail. The north wing was silent, bathed in the pale glow of dawn. No footprints, no toolbox, just that bone-deep chill that refused to leave. They never believed me, of course. Stress, they said, overactive imagination. But I know what I saw. A darkness that wore human skin, a predator in the shadows of a dead factory. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind whispers through the broken windows, I can still hear those heavy footsteps, just out of sight, waiting for their next victim. So yeah, security guard stories ain't always about ghosts and goblins. Sometimes, the real monsters are the ones that hide in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to pounce. I'm a long-haul trucker, seen more sunrises through grimy windshields than I care to count. But nothing prepared me for what happened out on I-70, dead of winter, Wyoming stretching out like a frozen wasteland. My rig, old bass, hummed along, radio sputter and static and Elvis crooning about blue suede shoes. Peaceful, almost boring. Then, like a bad omen, a flicker out of the corner of my eye. Headlights in the rear view, blinking twice, slow and deliberate. Not unusual, except these were off the beaten path, a side road that led to nowhere but trouble. Figured it was some lost soul missing a turn, so I slowed down. The lights crept closer, revealing a beat-up pickup, rusty as a shipwreck, and a figure bundled up like a snowman at the wheel. He pulled alongside, driver's side window missing, replaced by a sheet of plastic taped on. Just the sight of it gave me the creeps. The figure waved, a gaunt hand with fingers like icicles. Truck stop closed, he rasped, voice gravelly as a desert wind. Need a lift to the next one. Now, I have a policy, no hitchhikers after dark. Especially in the middle of nowhere with a vehicle looking like it belonged in a scrapyard. But something about his voice, that desperate whisper like the wind through a graveyard, tugged at something inside me. Maybe it was the Elvis singing about loneliness, or the way the moon turned the snow blue and eerie. Whatever it was, I pulled over. He shambled out, looking like a scarecrow in rags. Breath puffed out in white clouds, eyes hidden under a battered Stetson. Before I could even think twice, he was cleaving in, smell of wood smoke and something sour clinging to him like bad memories. Old Bess sputtered back to life, the heater whining its best against the Arctic chill. He sat stiff as a board, never flinching as we rumbled down the deserted highway. My mind raced, replaying every horror movie I'd ever seen. Every bump in the road felt like a warning, every shadow in the headlights a potential nightmare. Then he spoke. Not words, but a hum, low and guttural, like something ancient stirred from its sleep. My skin crawled, teeth clattered like castanets. I stole a glance, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. Those weren't eyes under the hat, but empty sockets, black voids staring into my soul. Terror choked me, engine noise a distant roar. My foot slammed on the brake, tires screaming on ice. He lunged, a skeletal hand claw-like on my arm. It felt like ice and fire, burning cold that spread through my veins. I wrestled, adrenaline pumping like a nitro boost, and somehow, miraculously, shoved him back. He hit the door with a thud, rolled into the snow like a discarded rag doll. I didn't wait. Old Bess roared to life, tires churning up ice as I fled into the night. The pickup sat in the rearview mirror, a dark silhouette against the endless white, headlights winking out one by one like dead stars. The rest of the trip was a blur of white knuckles and panic prayers. Never did I stop. Reached the next truck stop a shaky mass, story tumbling out like a dam burst. They looked at me like I'd lost my marbles, chalking it up to fatigue and overactive imagination. But I know what I saw, what I felt. There's something out there, roaming the desolate roads, hitchhiking rides from unsuspecting souls. Maybe it's just a man, warped by the cold and loneliness, but something inside me whispers different. Something ancient, something hungry, something that waits in the shadows of the highway, looking for its next lift. So, next time you see headlights blinking off a lonely road, keep on trucking. Don't stop. Don't look back. My phone screeched back to life at 3:12 a.m., jolting me from a half-awake doze where cable TV conspiracies danced behind my eyelids. Number unrecognized. It could be anything at this hour. Wrong number, drunk prankster, maybe even a coyote howling out of boredom. But hope always springs eternal in an electrician's pocket, so I answered. Sparks Electrical, this is Ben, I grumbled, trying to sound less like a man just ripped from REM sleep. Mr. Sparks. Thank God, you finally picked up. It's Mrs. Appleton, Your neighbor on Maple Street? Relief washed over me. Neighborly emergency usually meant blown fuse, maybe a trip breaker. Easy street. Sure, Mrs. Appleton, what's the problem? It's the lights, Mr. Sparks. They're behaving very strangely. Flickering, dimming, and there's this humming, this awful humming coming from the walls. The casual delivery of strange and awful sent a shiver down my spine. But hey, maybe she just has a faulty bulb and a vivid imagination fueled by late-night Agatha Christie. All right, Mrs. Appleton, stay put. I'll be over in 15 minutes. The drive to Maple Street was a cold, damp crawl through the sleeping town. Mrs. Appleton, a petite woman with worry etched around her eyes, met me at the door. As we stepped inside, the air vibrated with a low, almost imperceptible hum. It resonated in my teeth, sending goosebumps popping up like unwelcome guests. The living room was in darkness, illuminated only by the sickly yellow glow of a gas lamp flickering precariously on the mantel. Mrs. Appleton pointed towards the hallway. It's strongest in there, Mr. Sparks. Please be careful. My toolbox felt heavier than usual in my clammy hands as I followed the hum deeper into the house. It intensified with each step, morphing into a pulsating drone that thrummed against my skull. The hallway was bare, save for a dusty family portrait staring accusingly from the wall. And then I saw it, a faint glow emanating from under the floorboards at the end of the corridor. Kneeling down, I felt the heat radiate through the wood. Something was definitely wrong here. I grabbed my screwdriver, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. With a deep breath, I pried up the floorboard. What I saw stopped my breath. Not wires, not pipes, not anything I'd ever encountered in all my years of electrical work. A swirling mass of pulsating white light, crackling with an energy that seemed to defy physics. It writhed and danced within the subfloor, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Panic choked me, the screwdriver clattering to the floor. I scrambled back, tripping over Mrs. Appleton, who gasped in surprise. As I stumbled over her, I caught a glimpse of the portrait, the family frozen in eternal screams, their eyes wide with terror, reflecting the same white light that pulsed beneath the floor. I didn't wait to see more. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline propelling me through the house and out the door. Mrs. Appleton's frantic calls were lost in the wind as I sprinted away, the hum thundering in my ears, a chilling reminder of what lurked beneath the seemingly ordinary floorboards of Maple Street. I haven't slept since that night. The image of the pulsating light, the terror in the portrait's eyes, haunts me like a bad dream. I haven't set foot in Mrs. Appleton's house again, and honestly, I never will. I was working the late shift at the packing warehouse, just like any other night. As I was going about my usual routine, I heard a noise coming from the back of the warehouse. I thought it might be one of the machines acting up, so I went to check it out. But as I got closer, the noise stopped, and I couldn't see anything out of place. I shrugged it off and went back to my work. But as I was finishing up, I heard the noise again, this time closer. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. I started to feel uneasy, like I was being watched. Just then, I saw a shadow move out of the corner of my eye. I turned, expecting to see a coworker playing a prank on me, but there was no one there. I could feel my heart racing, and I knew that something wasn't right. I tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there. A few minutes later, I heard the noise again, this time coming from right behind me. I spun around, and that's when I saw him. There was a man standing in the shadows, watching me with cold, unblinking eyes. I could feel a surge of panic rising in my chest. I asked him what he was doing there, but he didn't respond. He just kept staring at me with this intense, unsettling gaze. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing on end, and I knew that I had to get out of there. I turned and ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear his footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew that I had to find a way to escape. I made it to the front of the warehouse and out into the parking lot. I could see my car in the distance, and I ran towards it as fast as my legs would carry me. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking with fear. As I finally got the door open and jumped inside, I saw the man emerge from the shadows. I started the car and peeled out of the parking lot, not daring to look back. Brace yourselves, because your boy Steve's got a doozy. Remember those late night shifts at the local grocery store? The ones where the fluorescent lights buzz like angry hornets and the only company you have is the ghostly hiss of the freezer shelves? Yeah, those. Well, last night, those late night vibes crossed paths with something straight out of a Stephen King fever dream. See, I was stocking shelves in the cereal aisle, humming off-key to the music playing Dancing Queen, when a shadow cut across the rows of frosted flakes. My head snapped up, expecting Timmy from Produce, notorious for his midnight snack raids. But instead, I locked eyes with nothing. Like, literally nothing. There was a gap in the darkness, a void where a person should have been. My stomach twisted into a pretzel. This wasn't just shadow playing with the lights weird. This was, should I call a priest, weird. I chalked it up to sleep deprivation and kept stacking, but the air crackled with something off. Every rustle of a plastic bag, every creak of the floorboards, sounded like whispers in the dark. Then came the humming. Low, guttural, starting faint like a distant engine, then throbbing through the aisles like a bass line from the underworld. It wasn't the freezer or the fluorescent lights. It was coming from everywhere. And with it, the silence in the store pressed down heavy, like a wet blanket smothering all sound except the pounding of my heart. Panic bubbled up, hot and prickly. I wanted to bolt, escape the supermarket horror show playing out in my head. But my legs felt rooted to the spot, glued there by some unseen force. The humming crescendoed, vibrating in my bones, and then I saw it again. The void. This time, it wasn't just a shape. It was an outline, like a figure sketched in charcoal on the air. Tall, spindly, with edges that blurred and shifted like smoke. It glided between the shelves, its nothingness eyes boring into me, sucking the warmth from my skin. And then, it spoke. No words, not exactly. More like a feeling, a cold tendril of dread slithering into my mind. It whispered of emptiness, of oblivion, of the space between things where monsters hide. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, could only stare, paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of its existence. It drifted closer, and for a horrifying moment, I thought it would touch me, engulf me in its inky emptiness. But then, as abruptly as it appeared, it was gone. The humming faded, the air grew still, and I was left alone with the echoing silence and the cold sweat clinging to my forehead. I don't know what it was, that thing in the supermarket aisles. But I know it was real, and I know it saw me. I finished my shift, my hands shaking as I bagged groceries, my mind replaying the horror on loop. Now, sitting here with the sunrise creeping in, I'm still not sure what to do. Do I warn people? Or keep this locked away as a dark secret, a chilling reminder that sometimes the monsters lurk in the most mundane places, waiting for the lonely hours to whisper their nightmares. factory floor echoed like a tomb, each footfall on the cold concrete magnified by the cavernous space. I, the night janitor, pushed my creaky cart, its metal wheels singing their mournful serenade. Neon lights from distant machines bathed the aisles in fluorescent greens and blues, casting jagged shadows from the towering equipment. The usual symphony of clanking gears and hissing steam was silent tonight, replaced by an oppressive quiet. Even the dust motes seemed to hang suspended in the air, reluctant to disturb the stillness. A shiver crawled down my spine, prickling the hairs on my arms. It wasn't just the cold, something felt wrong. As I rounded a corner, a movement caught my eye. A dark figure, tall and gaunt, slunk along the wall at the far end of the aisle. My heart hammered against my ribs. Panic flared, urging me to turn and flee. But curiosity battled with fear, rooting me to the spot. The figure turned, its features hidden in the gloom. An elongated head, devoid of hair, seemed to float above its body. A pair of eyes, bright pinpricks of unnatural silver, gleamed in the dimness. They burned into me, sending chills that burrowed deep into my bones. I gasped, a sound that shattered the silence like a gunshot. The figure froze, its head tilted as if listening. Then it began to move again, gliding towards me with unnatural swiftness, its elongated limbs blurring in the neon haze. Terror choked me. I stumbled back, knocking over a bucket of cleaning supplies. The clatter reverberated through the factory, a death knell in the oppressive silence. The figure lunged, its skeletal fingers reaching for me like claws. Instinct took over. I twisted away, adrenaline surging through my veins. I bolted, my ragged breaths echoing in my ears, the clatter of my cart behind me like a macabre drumbeat. The figure pursued, its unnatural speed closing the distance. I burst into the break room, slamming the door shut. My hands fumbled for the lock, fingers slick with sweat. It clicked, but the bolt didn't engage. I threw my weight against the door, bracing myself for the impact. A sickening thud resonated from the other side. The door creaked, wood splintering beneath unseen pressure. My body trembled, every nerve screaming in primal fear. Then, silence. A horrifying, unnatural silence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Slowly, tentatively, I turned the doorknob. The corridor was empty. The figure was gone. But the echoes of its unearthly presence lingered, a cold miasma clinging to the air. I stumbled back to my cart, legs like jelly. The rest of the night was a blur of empty corridors and haunted shadows. Each creak, each groan of the old building held the echo of the nightmare I'd barely escaped. Dawn couldn't come soon enough. As the first rays of sun pierced the factory windows, I fled, leaving the horrors of the night behind. The fluorescent hum of the office was my lullaby, the rhythm of countless nights spent battling spreadsheets and emails. Tonight, however, the usual symphony felt out of tune, a discordant echo that sent shivers down my spine. Maybe it was the storm, its claws scratching at the windows, or the eerie lull after our team dinner, everyone else safely tucked away in dreams. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. It started subtly, a shadow flitting across the corner of my eye, a door creaking a lullaby I hadn't hummed. I chalked it up to fatigue, my brain playing tricks in the dimly lit expanse of cubicles. But then, the printer whirred to life. Not with the usual staccato of toner and paper, but with a slow, grinding groan that felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. I froze, every nerve on edge. The printer sat alone, bathed in the ghostly glow of its own screen. No document had been queued, no button pressed. A gust of wind howled outside, rattling the windows. And then I saw it. A figure, tall and emaciated, silhouetted against the screen. It stretched like smoke, tendrils of darkness reaching out, wrapping around the glowing text. Panic seized me, tightening my chest like a vice. I scrambled back, knocking over a chair. The noise shattered the silence, but the figure didn't flinch. It turned, its head like a smudge of ink, eyes burning like embers in the darkness. A cold whisper drifted towards me, raspy and guttural, wrapping around my mind like a shroud. "You shouldn't be here," it hissed, the words twisting and warping inside my skull. "This isn't your time." My breath hitched, a scream choked in my throat. I clawed for the phone, dialing security on shaking fingers. The line buzzed dead, another cruel twist in this nightmare. The figure advanced, its form solidifying as it stepped out of the screen's light. Bones cracked and shifted, skin stretched taut over a skeletal frame. I stumbled back, tripping over discarded coffee cups and crumpled reports. The figure loomed, its maw stretching into a grotesque grin, revealing needle-like teeth dripping with an inky black substance. Just as its icy breath washed over me, the office door slammed open. Floodlights cut through the darkness, bathing the room in harsh white. Security guards stood silhouetted in the doorway, weapons drawn. The figure recoiled, a hiss escaping its maw before it dissolved into a puddle of inky shadow. The storm raged outside, but the echo of the encounter lingered. As they questioned me, their faces etched with skepticism, I realized they couldn't see the darkness I glimpsed, the horror that lurked just beyond the pixels of the office screen. Now, back in my apartment, the storm seems quieter, the shadows less sinister. But I know the truth: the office isn't just a place for spreadsheets and emails. It's a gateway, a thin veil between our world and something else, something cold and hungry, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim. You ever heard of Creepy Hollow Road? Yeah, that backwoods stretch of asphalt locals whisper about, the one said to swallow up lost souls and spit out rusted husks. Well, guess who had the bright idea of delivering a pizza there at 3 a.m., thanks to a GPS crapping the bed? Yours truly. It started normal enough. Rain drumming on the windshield, radio spitting static, headlights slicing through the inky blackness. Then, the GPS went haywire, spitting me onto a road marked closed on every map known to man. But hey, $40 tip says otherwise, right? So, I ventured in. Creaky Hollow wasn't just dark, it was oppressive. Trees clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers, shadows dancing macabre jigs on the pavement. My headlights barely pierced the gloom, revealing gnarled branches scratching against the fan like spectral nails. Then, the order. Delivery for Mr. Blackwood, the app chirped, the address an abandoned farmhouse at the end of the road. My skin crawled. No lights flickered, no car parked in the weeds. But the app insisted, the timer ticking down like a death knell. Gut churning, I crept out, pizza box clutched like a talisman. The porch creaked beneath my boots, each groan echoing in the hollow night. A cold wind whispered through the skeletal trees, carrying a faint, acrid smell like burnt hair and forgotten dreams. Then, a scratching sound, coming from beneath the porch. I froze, breath hitching in my throat. A pale claw, long and twisted, snaked out from the darkness, moonlight glinting off a wickedly curved tip. It scrabbled against the wood, inches from my foot. I stumbled back, heart hammering against my ribs. The pizza box skittered from my grasp, landing open on the porch. The scratching stopped. An unearthly silence descended, broken only by the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth. Then, another sound. A low, guttural growl, rising from the darkness beneath the porch. It vibrated through the floorboards, sending shivers down my spine. A monstrous shape slithered out, casting a grotesque silhouette against the moonlit wall. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe. I just stared, paralyzed by primal fear, as the creature uncoiled, revealing itself in all its horrifying glory. Skeletal, with fur-like matted tar and eyes that glowed like dying embers, it was something straight out of a nightmare, a beast woven from the shadows of that cursed road. It lumbered towards me, its fetid breath washing over me, and in that moment, a primal scream ripped from my throat. I turned and ran, adrenaline driving me like a demon. I didn't look back, didn't care about the pizza or the tip. All I wanted was to get out of that cursed place, to put miles between me and the nightmare I'd witnessed. I don't know how I escaped. My van roared through the darkness, headlights carving fleeting tunnels through the suffocating blackness. I only know that when dawn finally broke, painting the sky a bruised purple, I was miles away, still shaking, the stench of burnt hair clinging to my clothes like a ghostly souvenir. They don't believe me, of course. The cops think it was a prank, the dispatchers chalk it up to fatigue. But I know what I saw. I tasted the fear, felt the icy breath of that monstrosity on my skin. I'm Jake, a night road crew grunt, patching potholes and whispering sweet nothings to my jackhammer in the dead of night. Tonight, though, something went wonky on the deserted stretch of I-80. My radio sputtered static, the blinking highway lights seemed dimmer, and the air hung heavy with a silence that prickled like static against my skin. Chalked it up to fatigue, fueled by stale coffee and the hum of the asphalt plant in the distance. Then, headlights flickered in the rearview mirror, slow and deliberate, unlike the usual truckers blasting past. Figured it was a sleepy motorist, so I pulled over to let them pass. Big mistake. The car, a rusted-out jalopy with only one working headlight, crawled alongside. Driver's side window was missing, replaced by a grimy sheet of plastic. Inside, a skeletal figure in tattered clothes hunched over the wheel, their head obscured by shadows. A bone-chilling grin flashed in the moonlight as they locked eyes with me. They waved, a skeletal paw emerging from the darkness. My gut screamed nope, but some morbid curiosity kept me rooted. I waved back, feeling like a fool. The grin widened, stretching across their face like a cracked mask. Then, in a voice like nails on a chalkboard, they rasped, "Road closed up ahead." Need a lift. Every neuron in my body screamed danger, but something held me frozen, like a rabbit hypnotized by a snake. Then, the asphalt plant sputtered out, plunging the road into an even deeper gloom. The headlights died, leaving only the eerie glow of the car's lone beacon. Panic clawed at my throat, but before I could react, the figure was out of the car, shambling closer like a reanimated scarecrow. I scrambled back, heart hammering against my ribs. "Ah, no thanks, man," I stammered, voice cracking like a dry branch. "Just call a tow truck." The grin turned predatory. "No trucks allowed," they hissed, the words twisting in the air like smoke. "Only rides." They lunged, skeletal fingers reaching for me like claws. Adrenaline kicked in. I stumbled back, tripping over my work boots, and fell onto the cold asphalt. The laughter, high and hollow, echoed in the darkness as the figure loomed over me, their face a grotesque tableau of shadows and moonlight. Just as their clawed hands snagged my shirt, a blinding flash ripped through the night. A semi-barrel passed, its horn a primal scream tearing through the stillness. The figure recoiled, hissing in fury, before dissolving into the shadows like a wisp of smoke. The semi screeched to a halt, the driver yelling questions I couldn't answer. When I finally explained, shaky voice and wide eyes, they looked at me like I'd lost my marbles. Chalked it up to stress, fatigue, even hallucinations. But I know what I saw, what I felt. The next day, The construction crew found a rusty car abandoned by the roadside, windows smashed, driver's seat empty. No explanation, no trace of the skeletal figure. But I still hear their bone-chilling laughter on the wind, a grim reminder of the night the road whispered its secrets, and I saw something that shouldn't exist in the headlights' glare. So yeah, I am an emergency plumber, and Glinko Road isn't exactly known for its friendly drains. Tonight's story started with a frantic call, a burst pipe in an old Victorian on number 13, the kind with crooked gables and secrets older than cobwebs. Jackpot, or so I thought. Mrs. Fellows, the owner, greeted me with a smile sharp as broken glass and eyes that seemed to see right through you. The house itself reeked of damp dust and something faintly medicinal. Every floorboard whispered secrets, every gust of wind a spectral sigh. But hey, I've unclogged drains in worse haunted houses, so down to the basement I went. Now, Victorian basements are prime real estate for goosebumps, but this one took the cake. Rusting tools hung like silent executioners, cobwebs draped the walls like macabre tapestries, and a single flickering bulb danced, casting monstrous shadows. And then I saw it, the culprit, a pipe spewing water like a possessed geyser. Crouching down, I reached for the wrench, a prickle of unease spreading across my skin. It wasn't just the shadows, or the way the air hung heavy, like an unspoken warning. It was Mrs. Fellows, standing at the top of the stairs, her silhouette a skeletal claw against the dim light. She wasn't watching the pipe, no sir. Her eyes were fixed on me, laser sharp and unsettlingly knowing. I choked back a nervous laugh. Just fixing a leak, Mrs. Fellows, I mumbled, trying for normalcy. Her smile, if you could call it that, stretched wider, revealing teeth that seemed a little too pointed. Leaks, Mr. Max, she rasped, her voice like dry leaves rustling in a crypt, are more than just water and rust. They carry whispers, you see. Echoes of the past. Before I could decipher her cryptic ramblings, a floorboard creaked above. A low, guttural growl followed, sending a primal fear skittering up my spine. Mrs. Fellow's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with a chilling satisfaction. I didn't need another hint. I scrambled out of that basement like a scalded cat, leaving tools scattered like breadcrumbs for whatever lurked above. Mrs. Fellow's laughter echoed in my ears, a chilling melody that played on repeat in my nightmares. I never looked back, sprinting through the maze of shadows, every creak a chasing claw, every groan a whispered warning. I haven't set foot on Glinko Road since. Mrs. Fellows and her echoes remain locked away in that Victorian tomb, a grim reminder that sometimes the things that gurgle in the pipes are far worse than just water. I was working alone at the bar. I heard a noise coming from the back of the bar. I thought it might be one of the kegs acting up, so I went to check it out. But as I got closer, the noise stopped, and I couldn't see anything out of place. I shrugged it off and went back to my work. But as I was finishing up, I heard the noise again, this time closer. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. I started to feel uneasy, like I was being watched. Just then, I saw a shadow move out of the corner of my eye. I turned, expecting to see a coworker playing a prank on me, but there was no one there. I could feel my heart racing, and I knew that something wasn't right. I tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there. A few minutes later, I heard the noise again, this time coming from right behind me. I spun around, and that's when I saw him. There was a man standing in the shadows, watching me with cold, unblinking eyes. I could feel a surge of panic rising in my chest. I asked him what he was doing there, but he didn't respond. He just kept staring at me with this intense, unsettling gaze. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing on end, and I knew that I had to get out of there. I turned and ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear his footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew that I had to find a way to escape. I made it to the front of the bar and out into the parking lot. I could see my car in the distance, and I ran towards it as fast as my legs would carry me. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking with fear. As I finally got the door open and jumped inside, I saw the man emerge from the shadows. I started the car and peeled out of the parking lot, not daring to look back. I was working late at night as a cleaner at the subway station. I was cleaning the platform when I heard a noise behind me, like a heavy breathing sound. When I turned around, no one was there. Anyway, I carried on the cleaning for about 10, maybe 15 minutes when I heard it again. I turned around and saw a man standing there, sort of rough looking, just looking at me. I told him the station was closed, but he just ignored me. I went to fetch my phone and make a call to my manager, but he started to follow me. I asked him again if he was lost or stuck in the station, but he ignored me. I walked faster, but he stayed right behind me. I thought I was in trouble, so started to run. So did he. As I run through the station, he was right on my tail. I knew the station a lot better, shortcuts and routes that he didn't. I managed to get to the gates and was shuffling for my keys when everything went black. I woke up in hospital and was told I was hit over the back of the head with something blunt. The camera system caught the man red-handed, and he was later identified and arrested. I don't know why he done it or why he targeted me, but I'm just glad I am still alive.